Everyone, I'd like to call tonight's regular council meeting to order. Recommendation that the regular meeting be suspended and the committee of the whole meeting be convened. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, seconded by Councillor Niche. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Okay, I'd like to call tonight's committee of the whole meeting to order. Recommendation that the agenda for the committee of the whole meeting of August 24th, 2020 be adopted as circulated. Moved by Councillor Adie, second by Councillor Ranhawa. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, tonight we have a couple folks here who want to do some presentations. I'll just remind folks that this is a committee of the whole meeting. Generally speaking, that there isn't necessarily a back and forth with council. Council's here to hear your concerns. And then in the regular meeting, based on whatever items are being presented, we'll have our fulsome discussion at the time of a resolution. So happy to hear from folks today about a number of issues I know that are on our agenda tonight. But at first, I believe you need to mention something, Councillor Adie.
Yeah, in looking around the room and anticipating that one of the subjects of conversation soon will be the application for a temporary use permit, I need to make a statement regarding the position I find myself in with this one. At the last meeting when it first came up, on consulting with staff here, I recused myself from that because my home is in very close proximity to the proposed site. And so having taken this step, here we are again, and it's going to come up in a more concrete form tonight. In order to unrecuse myself, I require a legal advice to do so. I can't just kind of change my mind on a whim. There's a process to go through. This is actually required as per the provincial government's guideline on ethical conduct of elected officials. And it should also be noted that the conflict can be based not just on a pragmatic actual conflict, but it can also be on the basis of perception of conflict in the form of bias. So with respect to the current issue, the language that is tossed around in the case law on conflict cases is often what a reasonable observer might conclude. And in this case, a reasonable observer could conclude that because of the location of my home, I think my wife and I were speculating that it's probably within a couple of hundred yards of the actual property and, perhaps further from activity. But that I do have, in fact, a pecuniary interest or an indirect pecuniary interest in the outcome of this issue based on where I live. Now, there are exceptions to this, as I find out. Last month, I didn't know much about this. I know quite a bit more about it now. Exceptions can include the principle of common interest. This was brought to my attention by a community member. So in this exception, the idea is that if I share the impact of the decision with my neighbors, then I can be accepted and participate in the decision. The reason this is there primarily is for property tax purposes. Every year we decide on the property tax rate, and any decision we make to change a property tax is going to have a financial impact on ourselves as well as community members. But because it affects all property owners in the community, I'm accepted from that and I can make a decision. This isn't that, and there are cases that speak to a smaller proportion of the community having a common interest. And that is the matter on which I sought some legal advice regarding whether the exception of common interest would apply to me. The legal opinion that I received did not support the proposition that my common interests with others in the immediate neighborhood qualifies. Therefore, unfortunately, I'm between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, I'm in a position as a representative in a democracy, and my role is to represent the interests of the constituents in important decisions. And I take that very seriously. I'm not concerned with whether the decisions involved are difficult or easy. That's not relevant to me. So I take that part seriously, but against that, I have to also measure the jeopardy that I can not only put myself in as an elected representative, but also by participating in something where you could say I have a conflict, I can also put the decision that is eventually taken in jeopardy if it's challenged. So with that in mind, I had to balance that. Somewhere in between is the law, I suppose. So having put a great deal of thought into the matter, I felt not only is it important to explain this position, because I think it's in the public interest to understand these things, but I spent quite a bit of time researching it and seeking advice. And I believe that under the current circumstances, I have to maintain my declaration of recusal. So I'm going to stand in recusal on anything we talk about tonight regarding the temporary use permit application. And predicting what's likely to come soon, I think that means I'm going to step out now.
Yeah. And just to confirm that we do have it actually scheduled that Ken Bellman from the Port Authority will be speaking tonight, as well as some of the residents from the neighborhood at the CAL. So that makes sense that you would do that now. Thank you. You gonna do the same?
So, I got this notice regarding the proposed development permit, and my home is within the proximity of the new development permit too. So I feel like any decision on this one can change my property value. So I've been in conflict of decision making too. So I like to recuse myself too.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so seeing as we do have some scheduled speakers tonight, and we're in a time of COVID, so we have people register. We have a bit of a speaker list, so we'll start with Ken Bellman, the VP of the Port Authority for Public Affairs, and then we'll move on to some of the residents who have something to say, and then I believe Christine Danroth is here as well to speak on some other topics as well. So that'll be the order for this evening for the Committee of the Whole. So Ken, would you like to come forward?
I'm also going to ask Jesse Burton, our Director of
Great.
Public Services, come to me. Appreciating that this isn't a back and forth, but if there does happen to be a
Sure.
question of a more technical nature, Jesse may be better versed to answer that.
And Mr.
In
Bellman,
fact, I would say almost better than maybe.
could I get you to do your microphone too as well? Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
There we go. All right. Well, being here almost makes it feel normal, so I appreciate the invite. Notwithstanding the mask and the plexiglass, do appreciate the opportunity, Mayor and Council and staff. Thank you. I know that you've all seen the permit application as well as the submission that we provided to Council as part of the public comment period. So I'll try not to repeat that too specifically, but rather speak to the submission and try and apply a bit more context. So first and foremost, just in terms of background, PRPA's primary strategic interest is really based in land use planning with regards to this application, and our economic interest is secondary. But though it is necessary to justify our potential investment in this project and in this property, we view this piece of property as a really important area of buffer between Fairview Bay industrial activities. And if you recall back to the residential rezoning that was done here in 2015, I believe, we actually represented some concerns at that point about residential versus industrial conflict in that area. And that history really kind of brought us around on a level of strategic thinking about this property. And as we looked at it closer, we believe there's potential to secure that buffer through a combination of natural and recreational amenities on that property, but also being able to introduce a light industrial service cluster. And that approach from a land use perspective is certainly reflected in its original OCP designation prior to 2015. So in that light, we do recognize the concerns of local citizens that you'll be hearing from tonight and have heard from already, I'm sure, in residential neighborhoods that are close to the property. You know, historical industrial properties and activities have really been successfully reactivated, especially close to those neighborhoods, and that has resulted in impacts being brought back to those neighborhoods. But unfortunately, our community's economic base, much like most industries and the communities that they are home to, aren't without impact. So we do recognize that. But to segue, I mean, we've been really significant supporters and actors, quite frankly, in Vision 2030, which really emphasized the long-term integration of port and community. Our updated land use plan has made significant commitments to introducing buffers and formalizing community values within it. Our intermodal expansion plans, including investments that focus on really moving south from Fairview and away from the community, including terminal expansion, future container terminals, elimination of downtown trucking through the Fairview Connector Road, and using Ridley Island for logistics expansion and container storage, I think are all real testaments to our desire to move in that direction. And a big driver behind that, quite frankly, is recognizing that we want to make that separation of industrial activity and community wherever possible. And we've invested in noise mitigation on a more direct basis, you know, especially where we have direct leverage. For example, our investments into Fairview train whistling several years ago is a really good example of that, where we had the ability to do it. We've worked with our tenants on incremental improvements through conditions within their commercial leases. We haven't eliminated impacts, including noise, nor will we ever be able to do that. But we believe we have a track record of positive response and success in this area. We're not looking to undermine the community benefits that we've captured with all of those decisions and actions at all. In this case, the activation of our long-term interests not only secures that buffer, but includes the potential to introduce permanent natural and recreational values, including improvement and expansion of existing trails in the area. And that's all sort of part of our long-term interest in the property, should we move forward in purchasing it. But let me speak now to the temporary use permit that's in front of you. And specifically the benefits. We're operating on a basic assumption that this land isn't going to sit undeveloped in perpetuity. The OCP agrees with that, and so this isn't really a decision between development or no development. You know, if this was a piece of property to be purchased by a public entity, made into a park, taken off the tax roll, all the investments that would have to be made into creating that, we probably wouldn't be here doing this. But instead, what we think is the question here is what kind of development is appropriate for that property, when can it happen, and who can make the investment to actually move that forward in a way that's congruent with the community's values. We believe that we're making a proposal to advance development in exactly that way. So in the context of our long-term strategic interest in the property, this idea of container storage is an activity that's a relatively new idea for us that's tied specifically to Fairview expansion. And that's really spurred our ability to reach a conditional agreement with the property owner. Fairview expansion construction is imminent, likely breaking ground before the end of this year or Q1 at the latest. But as you know, container volume isn't consistent through the year. There's ebbs, there's flows, especially in this current period that we're going through of the pandemic and its impacts on Asia-Pacific trade. There's going to be lots of ups and downs. Managing the peaks of volume, especially unexpected peaks, can be difficult, and it has significant value when we can introduce options to deal with that. Managing those peaks, the value really comes, number one, in terms of Prince Rupert's reputation for reliability, which is a driver of, you know, the expansion of Fairview to begin with. But also balancing that on-strike construction activity and the volume surges will require management options to do that. Off-site container storage, surge capacity, if you will, is a very good option for managing that through the construction period. It's insurance, really, and there are real economic and employment benefits that we're looking to ensure. Employment, especially longshore hours, is directly tied to volume. Put that into context, in May, we were down 37% over May in 2019. That wasn't just a drop in volume, that was a corresponding drop in employment, corresponding drop of wages in the communities, and that has significant impact throughout our community at many, many different levels. Generally speaking, 1 million TEUs provide about 1 million longshore hours. That equivalent is about 550 FTEs. And of course, that's more people than just 550 because of the nature of the longshore board. And in particular, it's that bottom of the board and the indirect impacts that really come to bear when you start to look at the edges of it. Options to manage and optimize capacity and volume translates to options to manage and optimize jobs in our community. Now, every member of this council supports economic development. I know that. And I wanted to make that connection to emphasize that this decision has real, not just conceptual, economic impacts going forward. We had the ability to take a look at the memo provided by staff to council as part of this agenda package. We've noted the comments from internal staff, and they largely align with the due diligence that we're already carrying out with respect to a decision to execute on a lease and or a potential purchase down the road. Noting the provisions regarding the allowance of temporary use in R1, we are aware of that, and quite frankly, we would be really challenged economically to use land, especially for temporary purposes, without that area, given there's fill in that area and it actually paves the way to do this temporary use. So without that R1 piece being able to be used for temporary use, really the size of what's remaining there doesn't make a lot of economic sense. But given the historical OCP designation in that area of being business industrial, and arguably its best use, we are asking for a variance from that provision. We've also asked for 2 years. That 2 years lines up with the Fairview expansion period, and largely that access and site prep will certainly take up a good portion of that time. The critical period of container storage use could be close to 12 months when you start to look at how it lines up, not including that prep time. But essentially what we're looking for here is short-term certainty so that we can move forward on its short-term use during the expansion period. We are planning to actively look at mitigation of noise. A noise assessment is part of our due diligence, and we're certainly willing to discuss some baseline conditions for noise impact as part of the temporary use permit activation. So in conclusion, I hope we've added a bit of clarity to our intentions, our rationale, our approach to this project. If not, we're certainly willing to have a follow-up conversation at some point. But I hope in particular we're also able to quantify the very real economic impact of this permit decision. It's significant. It benefits a very broad section of the community in a very uncertain economic time. Our long-term interest in the property would be significantly facilitated with the approval of this temporary use permit. We acknowledge that this may have impact on residences closest to the property. It is a light industrial activity. It will generate noise. Will it generate enough noise to actually cause impact in those residential neighborhoods? It remains to be seen. We respect their concerns and opinions, and we would actively look to mitigate impact. As I said before, our long-term interest is actually in about creating buffer. So certainly we're not looking to undermine those values as we go forward. And we're looking to invest in long-term assets as we advance our long-term interest in this. We appreciate this decision is essentially weighing interests. I hope this decision isn't being framed as whether or not we should run the risk of impacting certain neighborhoods in the community or not. I think I know how we'd all vote if that was the question. Rather, this is really a decision about weighing broad economic benefit for the community in the short term and the long term versus that risk that may be there. We hope that you would agree that the net impact on the community would be positive in both the short term and the long term, and we encourage you to approve this temporary use permit. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Councilor Cunningham, Councilor Niche. Use your microphone.
Mr. Veldman, is this temporary use permit, so as you just said, it's sort of a pre-use to full-time down the road?
Potentially, but not necessarily.
Okay, now, is this going to be a 24-hour-a-day operation?
We've not got to the point where we can determine that. Obviously, the business of Fairview Terminal is 24 hours, and optimally, we would be able to maintain that. To a certain extent, I think it depends on what impacts look like and what we actually need to do to mitigate that.
Because, in my decision, if it was just an 8-hour day use, I wouldn't have any problem, a daytime use. But when you start using that as a 24-hour facility, the quality of life for anyone all around that area goes down the drain simply because now sleep and everything else is affected. And I would be more favorable if I knew it was only going to be a daytime operation and not a 24-hour operation. My other question is, why are you expanding north when all along you've wanted to expand south, and you have a lot of surplus empty property on Ridley Island that could be used for this? And also, I understand Metlakatla Corporation is putting in a logistics park. So I see no reason why you should come north when you could go south on that. It's to me, it's you know, and the fact that you're going to monitor. Well, I've heard a lot of complaints about your monitoring in the past, and you know, so it's hard to take it at face value that the monitoring is going to be done properly, simply because a lot of residents around the pellet plant and everything else never got the monitoring they thought they were going to get. And so that's had a very negative impact, not only on their quality of life, but on their property values. And you know, people trying to sell their property now on Lower Graham or on Graham there, people look at it and they look at the pellet plant and say, oh my God. Now, you know, this is going to negatively impact the prices along Kootenay, lower end of Pillsbury, Venarsdal, yours, and Alpine and parts of Graham. And, you know, like, these people have invested a lot of time and money in their houses to get them to where they are. And I just find it hard to see the port expanding north when all along they've said they wanted to expand south and away from the city.
All right, there's a lot of questions there to unpack. I'll see if I can remember them all in order. First and foremost, I would say potential impacts. I mean, I don't want to put lipstick on a pig and say that this isn't going to create noise. It is. It's moving containers, right? It's going to create noise. Whether that level of noise, based on where it is, what the ambient noise level looks like, distance from properties, the trees in between, etc., is actually a noticeable impact, I think is a completely different question, number one. So let's think about this as potential impact. Secondly, that's impact before mitigation. So whether mitigation is about hours, whether mitigation is about, you know, looking at the safety equipment on vehicles, because this isn't a terminal, this is a container storage yard. So what your ability to do in terms of the beeping of equipment, et cetera, looks different. So I think there are some things that we can do, but a lot of that also depends on what that operation looks like at the end of the day, and we're not at that point yet. But certainly conditions would be something we could look favorably upon. So that's number one. And number two, to follow up on that, and I don't think this is in order of your questions, but I'll try and make my way through. In terms of values of properties, I'm not sure that there's any corresponding factual evidence with regards to values of properties or ability to sell along Graham over the last 5 years. But we'll leave that as such. Secondly, when it comes to mitigation, I want to make a distinction there between mitigation and monitoring. We monitor noise at various states. You can go into our website at any point, other than the last couple months where we've had some issues and haven't been able to get repairmen in on those monitors. But we do live monitoring. It lines up decibel levels. That monitoring is absolutely available. We've set objectives with our tenant in terms of Westview, and generally speaking, they have met those objectives. We see a lot of noise complaints with regards to railway activity in that area. That is not an activity that we've got any leverage point in terms of addressing. So there's a big ball of noise, and I want to point back to my earlier remarks that we get it. There's been an impact on that neighborhood. We do get that. And my point is that we have been active, and we have responded, and we don't have the ability to eliminate it. But we have worked hard where we actually have the ability to do that, to either manage it or in some cases make a drastic reduction in impact. With regards to going south, I want to also emphasize here that this is not about moving the terminal north, right? This is about temporary container storage. We think that the long term for this property may include container storage, but really it's mostly about warehousing, equipment repair, trades-related type activities that could be in buildings in that area, longshore training and activities to that kind of thing. There is demand for light industrial property in this community. We think that the long-term interest in terms of our development there lines up quite well with it. And to be clear, our ability to develop the buffer aspect does need an economic return. So that is an area where we think there may be economic return. That's going to be part of our due diligence as to whether we purchase the property or not. So really, this container storage aspect is about facilitating short-term use to get there. And those other questions still require a lot of research on our side to ensure that there's a business case, that the site is what we think it is, what kind of developable area is actually there, et cetera, et cetera. So we do need an economic return to be able to establish that other aspect. We think that that's a path to get there. So I want to make sure that this isn't about, a narrative of expanding the terminal north. It's not. It's about an expansion project, container storage to manage surges, and in the long term, you're right. We want as much stuff to go south as possible. Why use container storage there? Because it actually is close and it's manageable, and during an expansion piece, as opposed to trying to dray trucks back through downtown to some other area to store them, this is actually the most efficient way to get at that. And those other, whether it be the Mount McCalley Import Park, whether it be the container yard that's going to be part of our export logistics park that we're proposing, those are all still 2 years away at minimum. Right, so it's really about a timing issue to really mitigate, or at least provide options to mitigate those surge congestion issues that can happen at Fairview.
Oh, before you
Okay.
speak, I just want to remind council that.
Can I just
hold
finish?
on. That we'll make our arguments during the regular meeting. If there's any direct questions to get clarity from the port regarding this proposal, that will inform your decision or not decision at the regular meeting. Let's do that. But I don't want this to be where we present arguments. So I just want to make sure that as council, if there's any questions that you're looking for from the port to inform your decision, let's ask them now, and then we will have a robust discussion about this as a council during the regular meeting. I just want to make sure that's clear, that that's the time for us to do that. And that being said, do you have any further questions for the port, Councillor Cunningham? Okay. Councillor Niche?
Well, you've kind of answered them already. One was, is it a 24-hour operation you're looking to do, which you've said that it is a 24-hour operation that you currently run, and most likely that's what you'd want to do. The second part is when you, in the next phase, if you were to do this 2-year permit and you were to go to the next phase after and turn this into a light industrial, now would that be something that you're talking a 24-hour operation again, or is this something that would be a daytime operation? And you did mention, I believe, that you would still be considering containers for use in the future. So my question is, if you're saying you want to move south with the project as far as the future of the container port, why would there be a need for containers on this facility in the future, I guess?
Well, and this is more about a land use issue than having a specific operations up for description or debate. Right? We think that that long-term piece may or may not be feasible, but let's put it this way. Given that our long-term strategic interest is about being able to maintain that property as a buffer, and it turns out that this storage activity ends up being a significant issue, then it's probably not going to be a long-term plan there. Now, if it turns out to be something that's very manageable, and it turns out that it doesn't impact residential neighborhoods at all, and for some reason there is a reason to have container storage that close to Fairview, and we don't expect that there would be, but we also don't want to write off that possibility, then that may be something that's a part of that. Right? At this point, in terms of the long-term development, while I've given some examples of some types of things that I think would be the type of activities we would be looking to have a light industrial, let's call it a service cluster, if you will. Those are merely examples at this point.
Any further questions for Port Authority? Okay, well, thank you for coming today and explaining your rationale, and we appreciate the comments, and we'll keep them under advisement when we have our discussions in the regular meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, next we will start with a representative from the neighborhood who would like to come first. Sure, yeah. And just for the record's sake, to say your name and your address for the corporate administrator.
So,
Perfect.
my name is Richard Wright.
Welcome.
Thank you. I live at 140 Alpine Drive, which is very close proximity, unfortunately or fortunately, to the request for this temporary use permit. I brought some letter and signatures. I'm not sure whether I can.
Yeah, you can hand them to the corporate administrator there.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Again, I won't take up much of your time. Again, I have the letters with a number of signatures from those in direct and close proximity to the site that is proposed for this temporary use permit. And again, rezoning for industrial use. Again, temporary really has turned out to be permanent. And again, the industrial component is a real concern for everybody that when I was walking the neighborhoods, not just the west end here, but also Pillsbury, Kootenay, the lower end of Sloan, and also Cassiar. And I know there's a lot of letters coming forth to City Council and administration regarding that. Again, the common theme is going to be the possibility of noise, additional traffic, air pollution. Some people were complaining already about, residue from whether diesel, whether it's the vessels contaminating their properties and buildings. Again, additional, the large site lighting that would probably be required illuminating surrounding properties. Again, the devaluing of their properties, which again, if you use the Graham Avenue and our present demand for housing, could be an argument, but anyways, that it is a common theme. People were worried about it, negatively impacting their quality of life. The impact on the campground is obviously right at the one end, I guess you'd call it the east end of that property, and there are permanent residents there, and of course the visitors to our city coming and going that stay there would be impacted quite heavily depending on what part of that property was used for what. So those were really the common themes that I found when I was walking through the different neighborhoods. Again, I think listening to Mr. Veldman's presentation, I think you can gather that the uncertainty and the fear of the unknown, when nobody can say, okay, we're going to be using this property temporarily, which again turns that could be permanent, right? If we need additional storage down the road for containers, I guess the fear of the unknown. A lot of people are expressing that. I don't think, again, if there was commitments to an 8 or 7 till 5 or whatever, even 6 o'clock at night, and again, I appreciate the port's willingness to look at all of the factors, which I'm sure they do. I mean, I've been a proponent, obviously, in business for quite a few years in the town. I am a proponent of development. The city needs more. We need more people. But again, listening to the neighborhoods, there is a fear that their quality of life will be impacted more than what is being led to believe in the submissions. So, again, I'm more like the messenger, and really the message from the neighborhoods is we hope that council will look at the possibility of either rejecting, denying the application, possibly until there's maybe more information, certainty for the residents. Again, we all can acknowledge the enormous and appreciate the enormous benefits that the city as a whole receives from PRPA and DP World. It seems to me, it kind of confuses me why DP World actually isn't here presenting, because it's actually DP World that will be creating all the noise. But anyways, we just feel that it's not the right place, you know, for this activity. And then one other question that, again, I'd like to leave this with Ms. Miller. I sent it out to the council and administration, and I was wondering if, I guess you couldn't stop the port from purchasing this property, I would imagine, that's private, and so they could buy the property. But if they were to buy the property, is the port exempt from local zoning? Once they buy it as a federal entity, can they trump, you know, municipal, local zoning bylaws? Because if they can, we're sitting here kind of wasting our time, I would think. So if you know, if we can get an answer, the public can get an answer on that question, how that will impact everything, I think that would be great. So thank you very much for allowing us to speak.
Thank you. Councillor Niche.
Just curious on to how many signatures were on your paper there.
There's approximately 100, which equates to about 100 residents, or 50 to 100 residents. There is other people, I think, that are submitting that did parts of Graham Avenue that they said they were going to look after that, so I didn't look at that. Again, summertime, quite a few, there was not quite a few, but there was a few homes that people were obviously away on vacation. So, but I have to say that of those 75 to 100 residents that I talked to, I'm going to have to say 98% spoke against it. And again, a lot of people weren't aware of it. I think I guess when you publish any kind of zoning in the paper, I mean, really, realistically, if we want to be honest, how many people pay any attention to it? And it's sometimes the wording. You know, when you say temporary 6 month, and it's you know, it's the port. I mean, everybody realizes, you know, the importance of the port to our community. So if you're looking at it, but we just want something for 6 months temporary. Most people are going to go on to the next page, and then when you read a little bit more, an additional 6 month stretches to 2 years, and then becomes permanent. So again, I think with a little more maybe work with the port and the city before this goes ahead or whatever, might alleviate some fears.
Thank you.
Councillor Cunningham.
Couple questions, Mr. Wright. Were you aware of the zoning of this property when you purchased your house?
No, I wasn't. I've been there for about 30 years, and I was born in Prince Rupert. I've never known any industrial activity down at that property. It was a rock quarry. It's a place for kids to party. I've seen developers, if you want to use that, contractors purchase that property. We always understood it was, the reason they were purchasing it was for residential and commercial use, and the current zoning, not one person that I talked to would have an issue. It's staying P1, and the activities that would be allowed under P1, of course, the residential R1 is not an issue. But I've never seen any industrial activity, and I've been in business or worked for contractors for 46 years. So.
And also, would you be willing, as a citizen group, to sit down with the board of the port and try and solve this problem on a one-to-one basis, if it's something that would be acceptable to both groups?
For sure. I mean, I've been, like I said, I've been fortunate to be part of the community, both in business and social athletic activities. I've had a great working relationship when I was in business with the Port Authority. Again, I fully understand and appreciate the benefits from the Port DP World and what they provide, not just in jobs, but also through their community funds, the social programs that they support. Again, yeah, I'm retired. I have lots of time, and yeah, I don't mind getting involved.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your comments and your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I think also for council's note that we will have all that information presented to us during when the resolution comes to around letters and such. So I believe we have another resident who's going to come forward as well. Welcome.
Hi, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bruce Hampson. I've been around Prince Rupert for something like 70-something years, so
Could I ask you to put the mic on for
yeah.
the folks at home, and also state your name and your address as
Oh.
well for the corporate administrator?
My name's Bruce Hanson. I live at 584 4th Avenue East in Prince Rupert. And I'm here to address the proposals with regards to the port wanting to buy some property or lease it for a certain length of time out in Fairview Bay. But I'm here for two reasons. First, as a representative of the Hogan family, who own approximately 14 lots right above this area. And on the second concern was, I have spent a lot of time here with the DFO, and we have a salmon spawning stream on Moresby, and I don't see anywhere where any of this was addressed with regards to that property. We spent over $200,000 putting in a fish ladder there with regards with the previous owners who were all in favor. They were thinking that this would be a nice residential area and a park and whatever for people in Rupert. But to get to my little spiel here, I also found it very misleading that the city says that it's a temporary 2-year deal, where on the other hand, the port wants to buy it outright. Well, I didn't quite understand is this some deal so the port can get it and do what they want to do with it in 2 years? You know, there was quite concern, and many of us who are owners out in that area never knew a thing about this. If it wasn't for Richard Wright and some other local people, we wouldn't have known that this was taking place. The property was always viewed as residential and is situated between two fairly new residential areas, being Alpine, Comox, Pillsbury. And the owners who built homes in this area are paying significant taxes due to the neighborhood's high valuations. One of the properties involved is Lot 4 on Alpine Drive, which directly overlooks the area in question. This is a huge piece of property. I was going to build a house there, and after spending some time out there and listening to the noise, my wife and I said we better give our head a shake and think about doing something different with it. In the meantime, I had on more than one occasion been phoned by the previous town planner, Kretschik his name, from downstairs, and he suggested that because of the size of the property that we could build a nice fourplex on it. So that was under consideration at the present. I have been out there working with a surveyor, and I right now had made arrangements for Fallers and excavator to come in to do some work on that property. And after seeing this proposal here, we have come to a grinding halt, because I can right now throw a rock from our property into a bunch of dumpsters situated right below us. So that's how close we are. The lot that I'm talking about is 15,000 square feet, overlooking the whole of Alpine, next to one lot over from Richard Wright's, and going out past Travis McNeese. So that was a concern that just came up. I've just been able to do this last few days here. Changes from residential to industrial, and at present we are looking at stored containers, concrete, rebar, as well as asphalt, creosote logs plus rocks, and muskeg. This lot is in its existing condition, is appraised at $140,000 this year's taxes assessment. Within the last month, like I say, we had it surveyed and we were going to go ahead with some arrangements. And if this proposal was to take place, it would drastically reduce the enjoyment and the value of that one property alone. In addition to the number 4 lot on Alpine Drive, my family has 13 other lots in this area from Alpine Drive to Westview School. And all these for potential properties would be impacted by this rezoning because it overlooks the whole thing. If the rezoning goes ahead, our family had no other option but to sue for the loss of value. This was undertaken after we discussed it with a lawyer, because we've had that property for many years. As owners of these properties are very concerned about the increased noise levels, light and diesel air pollution that would be created from the commercial industrial use of this site. We ask that the city investigate the loss of use and enjoyment and corresponding decrease in property values before considering this proposal. So now with regard to my second part of this presentation, I hope I'm not boring too many people. I find it very surprising and alarming that none of the correspondence with regards to this bylaw change mentions the impact to any spawning salmon habitat. There are several studies that show Moresby Creek to host spawning salmon and trout. I was the project manager for the Community Fisheries Development Center when in 1999 we began a salmon restoration project on Moresby Creek. This was a joint venture between the City of Prince Rupert, Fisheries Renewal BC, and Matt Pedersen, who at that time was the present owner of that property, and his partner. A letter of agreement was signed, and we built a fish ladder with money from Fisheries Renewal BC that was in excess of $200,000. And we cleaned up the wetlands and once again made spawning accessible to this area. Having spent some time on this property lately, it is quite discerning to hear the noise and the disruption from the port. Having this site rezoned would make it that much more disruptive to the present and surrounding residential neighborhoods, some of these areas being Alpine, Graham Avenue, Atlan, Pillsbury, and Kootenai Avenues. We are all adjacent to this site. Many of the wetlands have been filled in and destroyed as well as the creek itself. At the present, I am trying to get the DFO to address the loss of habitat destruction that has occurred on this property. Now, I have been to the DFO on more than one occasion. The gentleman, the town planner, would phone me to go out as a liaison, and I would do the taping for the setbacks on that site that we're discussing. And many times I've gone to the DFO office here. I've phoned Vancouver Habitat, and as today, to yet today, we have not had one person phone me back. And this has been going on for quite some time. Whereas recently I phoned Taylor Backrack, our MP, federal MP, and asked him if he would step in and give us some guidance on with regards to salmon rearing streams, because they are a federal jurisdiction and they are not to be impacted by any situation such as these people are wanting to do. So, therefore, on behalf of the existing landowners or residents of this area, I'd appreciate the city turning down this application rezoning and ask the port to use some of their land between Prince Rupert and Barrett Rock, therefore not affecting any residential areas. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all in favor of any type of, progress with regards, as long as it's done in an environmentally friendly way. I'm totally acceptable to anything like that. For a city that is trying to find some new residential properties to build on, I find it quite difficult to believe that they would time an existing turn an existing residential property into an industrial area and completely disrupt the existing surrounding residential areas. So, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you.
I just hope that.
So, is that creek still a salmon bearing creek, or is it being destroyed in the in turn with all the fill and everything that went in there?
At present, it is in a very destructive situation, and in November, Mr. Story was filling it in there, and he came to me one day, and he was laughing, and he said, about your salmon spawning stream. I said, yeah, what about it? He said, I have to admit, I just saw some coho up at the road spawning. And I personally, with the group of people and DFO, dumped 10,000 coho fry in that rearing pond in the year 2000. And because of difficulties that we encountered, not only with the filling in of the properties, but where it went under the railway tracks and into the ocean, we did not at the time understand that everything was fine when the smolts were going out at high water. They proceeded into the ocean. At low water, there's an outfall there. They fell down into pools, and there the cranes and seagulls ate a substantial amount of the fry. So we then went and put a chute from the railway tracks down to the old grain elevator to try to remediate that problem. And in the meantime, with disregard by DFO and no more community fisheries, or nobody's looking after the salmon habitat anymore, that has become to neglect, and that is why we have not had the returns that we were hoping. So it was just a community project to enhance the city and make things better around here. That was all what our plan was at the time, not to make it impossible for anybody to build on or whatever. But it was just a community get together, and we had a lot of cooperation and a lot of volunteers that came out and helped us. And I have all the records, as well City Hall has it now, and DFO, that we as the community fisheries compiled with regards to that system. So, it was just to make it better, that was all. Okay?
Thank
Anyhow,
you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one last presenter, Christine Danroth. And special guest. Welcome. And just state your name and your address for the corporate administrator. Oh, and sorry, one moment. Forgot about our two counselors over there. Bring them back in the room. Okay, you may proceed.
Hi there, my name is Christine Danroth, and I live at 424 Dunsmuir Street. And this is my son Parker Danroth, and we're here to talk about the arena and maybe if it can be opened earlier. So Parker put together some important reasons.
So, reason number one, I really want the arena back because most people are not having fun when they're not playing sports. Because other people get to play sports, it was like, why can't we play? That's kind of unfair. And number two, we can social distance on the ice. We can build our skills and see our friends, but it's kind of like we really want it back, and it's kind of for that just see other people playing, having fun, but it's like, why, I can't play because And reason number three, kids these days are really bored and they're not really doing anything, and if we get back on the ice, it's probably going to be good for our mental health, and I'm really happy if you could probably open it up again, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Parker and I have had lots of discussions about how important the arena is to many families in Prince Rupert. He's also representing quite a few of his friends tonight, and we would just like to talk about or have a conversation at some point if it can be opened earlier.
Sure, I think that's easily something we can chat with staff about. Councillor Nish, then Councillor Scott Moore.
Can you leave your phone number, and I'd like to talk to you later.
Yeah, no problem.
No, I just want to acknowledge Parker for being so brave and coming up and talking to all these big scary dudes up here and everything. And I think it's really important that you're advocating for your friends and speaking up. And I just want to acknowledge you for your bravery for that, but also the importance of mental health. That's something that's kind of the silent pandemic in the background that's affecting a lot of our children and our youth, as well as adults, parents, everything. So it's been quite a challenge for the past few months, but that's something that we definitely will be looking into. And I appreciate your advocacy, and thank you for that, Parker.
Councillor Cunningham.
I'll echo the same as Councillor Skelton Reid. That's I'm so used to just calling him. Yeah, but this is impressive that you come here, Parker, and do this. Represent your friends. I wish more of your friends had come with you. I think this is important. It's the youth of the city talking, and we should be listening to them a little more sometimes. So thank you very much for coming. And don't be shy to come again.
Yeah, we're seeing you next month.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, so that will adjourn our committee of the whole. So I'll entertain a motion to reconvene the regular council meeting. Moved by Councillor Scott Morvan, second by Councillor Cunningham. All those in favor? Motion is carried.
You should stick around.
Thank you, guys.
Thought perhaps they'd like to stay. Okay. So, recommendation that the agenda for the regular council meeting of August 24th, 2020 be adopted with an additional late agenda item 4A, OCP update and development incentives program. Moved by Councillor 80, second by Councillor Ranhawa. All's in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Item 3A, recommendation that the minutes of the special council meeting of July 20th, 2020 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, second by Councillor Skelton Morvan. All's in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Item 3B, recommendation of the minutes of the committee of the whole of July 20th, 2020 be adopted. Moved by Councillor 80, seconded by Councillor Moreau. All is in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. And item 3C, recommendation of the minutes of the regular council meeting of July 2020 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Nish, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. All is in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, first up, we have a report from our Chief Financial Officer regarding the June 2020 financial variance report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In general, revenues and expenses in the operating and utility funds for the end of June, so halfway through our fiscal year, continue to perform as expected given the COVID-19 pandemic and the transition to essential service provision only. Performance is similar to that in last month's report, given most restrictions were still in effect. We will have a clearer understanding of the revenue impacts once the summer is over, given restrictions were slowly being lifted. As of June, capital projects were underway. The water dam project is on budget and in July. The alternate approval process for both the dam and the landfill projects was completed to enable council to proceed considering their respective loan bylaws this evening. And that concludes my report.
Great, thank you. Moving. Question? Yeah, go ahead.
We adopted the last budget under the impression that we were going to have to make an amendment given the significant impact that COVID-19 has happened or that has had on the budget. I'm wondering if you guys have a rough time frame on when that budget amendment will be brought back to council.
We are in the process of having a 5-year financial plan budget amendment scheduled for September. We believe might be pushed to beginning of October.
Councillor Renha?
So like we lost some money on the transit and marina and probably recreation. So we in budget or we have any challenges for that?
Well, there's no changes that we can really make to the budget necessarily right now because a lot of our costs are essential services. So, I mean, the airport ferry is one of the other ones that we've lost revenues in, but we've still maintained the operation mainly for things like emergency services, keeping the airport open for any of the medevac services, that sort of thing. So we've cut costs already where we possibly can, and the revenue impacts are definitely being felt for us. It's not going to change taxation for this year. What we're doing is we're trying to modify some of our service delivery where we can right now in order to stop the bleeding as best we can. What possibly would end up happening is that we would end up being in a bit of a deficit this year. But fortunately for us, we're not a profit-driven organization, in which case we're not going to post anything like the losses like a private enterprise would, because we are generally supposed to be covering costs. Now, obviously, taxation is our last item, basically, to balance our budget, and because our revenues are depleted, right, we're hoping that some of the savings that we've been able to garner in some of the other areas will offset part of it.
Do we need a resolution for that? No. Okay. Thank you for the report. Okay, next we have our planner who is working with us on our new OCP update, Rob Buchan, who's going to present an OCP update to the community as well as a development incentive program that we're developing for new development incentives for the community. So, welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council, staff. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to you about the OCP update and the proposed development incentives program. I attended with great interest the unveiling of the Vision 2030 vision last December 12th and watched this optimistic, ambitious vision be laid out to the community to a very receptive audience. And during that meeting, Mr. Mayor, you announced that shortly thereafter work on updating the official community plan would commence, and indeed it did. I was hired by the city to undertake this work for you, this important work. And the beginning phase of that work was a lot of research and speaking with senior staff and looking at documents that have been important in the past for your growth management. Vision 2030 it lays out a very broad land use vision for the community, and we've used that. iPlan has used that as the presumption of how this might be used in the official community plan. One of the first things we did to test that assumption was to do a survey to the community. And there was a very good response to that survey. And one of the purposes of that survey was to test whether or not Vision 2030 resonated with the public in general. We certainly saw it resonate with the participants at that meeting back in last December. And it is very strongly supported. So we've been using 2030 as the land use vision for the new official community plan. I can give you some update on some of the work that we've done with this, and certainly we had that survey, and we've communicated the results of the survey back to the community in a newsletter, along with other surveys. There's 4 additional surveys that are currently live on your website, and we're starting to get some good response back to those ones as well. The first survey last February was about the land use element of Vision 2030. The new surveys again ask the question about land use in case there are other ideas. So that question hasn't closed, but also it's introduced some proposed policy for the new OCP on local food production, food systems, some questions about our infrastructure here, as well as social and cultural development and climate change and greenhouse gases. So those current surveys are giving people the opportunity to comment on proposed policies. So we're looking forward to a very strong response to the current survey. We're going to be beginning work on an information video to be rolled out to the local cable station, which will be informational about the process and about what a community plan does and elements of the draft official community plan that's underway. And hopefully that'll be out within 3 or 4 weeks. Following receipt of these latest, the current round of surveys and that video, we're hoping to have a round of very small, short meetings with the public sometime in September. So it's been a very ambitious and broad consultation process, especially given the challenges that the pandemic have presented to us. But we are making very good progress, I'm pleased to say, and we're looking forward to getting a draft out to the public for their comment. So that's the update that I can give you on the official community plan work to date. The second aspect of what I want to speak to you tonight is related to the official community plan. You know, as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, Vision 2030 is an ambitious and optimistic vision of the future. But there's work to be done to get development on the ground. And one of the things that has been discussed is putting together a program that will encourage developers to see that vision and invest in the community in a big way. And really it needs to be in a big way to accommodate all of the growth that is contemplated to be coming from the growth of the port and what that means for the city. So I was asked to look at the range of incentives that could be put on the table for attracting developers to come to the community and invest. These are in the report that's been put on your table this evening. And I'll just go through these very quickly. There's a number of cost elements that you can put into this program. Currently, you don't have development cost charges. We're simply saying delay work on putting those in for the next few years. Because if those costs are not in there, that will be an incentive for the development community. We're suggesting that you could amend your bylaws to waive building permit fees and rezoning fees, development permit fees, and development variance permit fees. Again, that would collectively be a significant inducement for developers to look at developing in Prince Rupert. You currently don't negotiate or don't have an community amenity contribution program. This is a good program to have, but better when development's really busy and active in the community. So we're recommending that you defer bringing in such a program for 2 or 3 years. Frontage improvements done on a piecemeal basis as building permits are issued for new development isn't the most optimum way to improve your infrastructure, and it's a significant cost. So we are recommending that any frontage improvements being associated with a new building permit be not required, and that necessary improvements be done on a block-by-block basis as a part of a coordinated city improvement program at a subsequent date. A major part of this development incentives program is looking at having a bylaw to a revitalization tax exemption bylaw, which would allow the city to waive municipal part of property taxes, and you have the ability to waive these taxes on terms that you set for up to 10 years. So what the report lays out for you to consider is waiving the incremental taxes, the increase in taxes as a result of new commercial development for 10 years. Now, the second half of the 10 years, we would think that you should ladder up the taxes so it's not a big hit on year 11. So from year 5 then to 10, you'd be looking at incremental increases to get to what the taxes will be. We're not recommending, however, that you give this exemption in the Midtown area because our impression is that new commercial development should really be concentrated in the downtown and the new Marina district. We're recommending that there be the same kind of 10-year tax increase waiver for new residential buildings in all 3 districts: the Midtown, the downtown, and the Marina district. You can use this program for renovation and improvements as well. The city of Prince Rupert has quite a bit of vacant space in its downtown. So having a program to waive the increase in taxes as a result of facade improvements and internal renovations could be a very significant way of bringing around a refurbishment, a renovation of your existing building stock. So we're suggesting waiving taxes for 5 years for renovated residential or renovated commercial buildings in the downtown. And in a very rough calculation of the amount of space that's vacant space as of the 2017 data, you could be seeing upwards of 200 to 300 residential units as if it was all converted into residential use coming from that program, using the existing building stock that you have. So that could be a very significant, impactful program. The Marina District also calls for some light industrial development as well. Light industrial, this would be more of creative spaces kind of uses, and we're suggesting a 5-year tax increase waiver for that in the Marina District. So that covers roughly the downtown revitalization, or the revitalization tax exemption part of the program that we're recommending. Associated with these other incentives, we think making sure that your processes are as efficient as possible for timely approvals. Fast tracking applications in the downtown area, for example, is another inducement or incentive for a development community. You get a good reputation within the broader development community in the province, and developers will be more interested in coming here. So that's recommendation is focused at helping develop that reputation. And finally, we think it would be potentially very effective to invite a group of larger investors in the province and possibly even from the country to come to Prince Rupert to be introduced to the opportunities that are here, to be told about this program, and to be provided with some market information. And when I say a group, we're thinking a smallish group, around 10 to 15 significant developers to see if, to basically to show them the opportunity. And if this could be done this fall, in early to mid-October, that would be very good timing in regards to having this associated with the completion or near completion of the official community plan. I'm happy to take any questions if you have them.
Great, thank you. Questions from council? Councilor Morrow.
First of all, thanks very much for your work. I know I get made fun of a lot by these guys for reading policy on Friday night, and I just want to say, the official community plan was one of the reasons I actually got involved in local government in the first place. So for me, I think I'm a little more enthused than most on this topic, but I'm happy to see the progress. I'm just philosophically, I'm a big believer in offering the carrot before the stick. So I think this suite of incentives that you've offered, you've obviously understood the financial capacity limitations of the city in recommending actions that don't necessarily cost us a significant amount of money, but actually forego future revenue that otherwise would not have existed. So I do appreciate that. I suppose my only question, I'm in agreement with basically everything in the package. I would just like a bit more of an understanding of your rationale for on the post-development costs, on the tax revitalization exemptions. Why 5 years waiving in industrial areas, particularly I'm thinking the Marina District, but up to 10 years in the downtown, when I think the idea of Vision 2030 was that the Marina District was basically going to become an extension of the downtown?
It's a fine question, and as these are just suggestions, but my thought is that the commercial redevelopment and the residential that's required for all the new workers and families perhaps was more of a priority, and there's more of that land that's designated in the Marina District as well as the downtown. It wouldn't be a problem in my mind to increase the light industrial, however, to 10 years if you wanted to achieve that. So I think that's an option. It's not that this isn't a strong recommendation on that part of the proposal.
Well, and just as a follow-up then, would the rationale be similar then for, obviously we want to see more new builds than renovations? Is that also the reason for that discrepancy there?
And the new builds are there's much more capital involved, so it's a bigger risk. So that's the major underlying rationale for the difference there.
Other comments from council? Councilor Ady.
Yeah, I'd like to echo Councillor Moreau's approval of the work that went into it and the contribution you've made. It's the kind of expertise that we certainly don't come to the table with. So I appreciate that a great deal. I also appreciate the focus on incentives that will affect, in particular, the downtown, because I think the vast majority of what I hear when I hear people, griping about the state of things, they talk about Third Avenue and they talk about, the obvious areas in which a certain amount of decay has happened. And I think that if we can use this kind of a program to really target that, then people are going to feel a lot better about the rest of the community as well, and that translates into progress in other areas as well. I just want to clarify, and maybe it's just me that I missed something. When you talked about the building permit fees, you basically spoke about them in general as we eliminate the building permit fees for 3 years. Is that something that is focused particularly on downtown and the Marina District, or is that a general, guy wants to build a deck, does that apply to him too? And as I say, it might be that that I missed it.
No, thank you, Councillor. I failed to mention it in my introduction. These development incentives are intended for the city core, the three planned districts, the Midtown, Downtown, and the Marina District. That's because that's where the work really needs to occur first. It needs to be revitalized to attract new residents. The new residents are needed for the port growth. So focusing these incentives on the downtown is really the underlies this program, this proposal.
Councillor Niche.
Well, thank you. And yeah, I just wanted to say that I think, you know, this is what we need to kickstart this downtown. I think, you know, it's kind of funny because a few years back I used to hear people, you know, on Facebook complaining about, you know, how this was a ghost town, now it's a dead town, and, you know, trying to wonder why these people couldn't understand what was going on around here. And then I started thinking about it, and it's, you know, there's a group of people in this town that they don't drive, they walk everywhere they go, and the only thing they see is downtown. They don't get to drive out to Ridley Island and see what's going on out there, or they don't get to go out to Watson Island and see what's going on out there. And they don't see all the good things that are happening. All they see is a downtown with boarded up windows. We're never going to have the downtown that we had in the 80s. It's a different environment, you know, with Amazon and that, internet shopping. But for us to transform it into housing and for people to start investing in their buildings, we definitely need to do something like this. And I think this is the perfect way of doing it, because it's not at a direct cost to us, but any more money that we gain in the future is a bonus. So I think this is a great way of going about it and trying to get maybe the last thing that we need done in this town, and that's kickstarting this downtown to it will never be what it was, but it'll be something new and better in the future. Thank you for your work.
Councillor Cunningham.
I echo my fellow councillors' sentiments, but you say this is just for the downtown core? So if somebody builds a new residential house or renovates a residential, there's no tax incentives if it's not in the downtown core?
That's correct.
That seems to be, you know, like, to me, if somebody wants to improve the lot, and we have a lot of rundown and poorly maintained houses throughout the city, and I think we should have some sort of incentive for people outside the downtown core to be included in stuff like this. And the other question or comment I've got is about renovation versus new build. Sometimes renovations in this town can be as expensive as a rebuild, because once you get into them, and Councillor Nice will testify to this, and you start tearing an old house apart, you're basically rebuilding it from scratch. You don't have a lot left to work with. And renovations can sometimes be a little more expensive even than a rebuild.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I having built new and renovated myself, I appreciate that there are surprises. And I think the renovations will really only work for those buildings that are structurally sound. And one of the advantages of this is those buildings, if they're structurally sound, they're already out of the ground, so they don't have to deal with the cost of getting out of the ground, which can be a bit of a surprise and expensive in Prince Rupert. So that's some of the rationale for the difference between the two. This is discretionary. Council can set different numbers on this if they wanted, but it is focused on the downtown for the reasons that have been explained. And I should emphasize that the report notes that this is recommended for a short period of time, and you know, at least an initial 3 years, and you see how this is being effective. If it needs more time, then you give it more time. If it's really successful and development starts occurring and this becomes the place for developers to come, then you might look at adjusting or phasing out this program, and because it may not be necessary. And that's been the experience in some other BC communities. Once this program starts to work and work well, they can phase it out. I think Prince George is an example of that. City of Campbell River is another example where its downtown languished for a long time. No new development in the downtown, in the historic downtown. And that impacts the reputation and the attractiveness of a community. The downtown is the public face for visitors. And if that public face is not looking good, it really impacts your ability to be successful. So understanding that there are limited resources, and that you do have city services to pay for and staff to provide those services, we're trying to focus this on where the biggest impact is. I recommend with all these things is you monitor it, and if you need to adjust it as you go, you do that. But you get started with something, and I think that this is based on the experience of a lot of places in BC that have successfully rolled out similar programs.
Okay, well, thanks very much for your insight, and I think you've brought a big smile to a few of us, because we've all thought along these lines for a while, but there was never a financial appetite to do it. And I think you've pointed out to us that it's not going to hurt the city much for these incentives and that, and even Corinne might smile a bit.
I think staff have noted that this is about deferring your revenues from new development. Without doing this, you may never get that revenue. So in a very real way, this program wouldn't really be losing anything. You'd be creating a future revenue stream, a significant revenue stream. So I think it's a low impact way of being effective in bringing around new development.
Mm-hmm. Well, Councillor Randhawa.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so again, mostly councillors say everything. Thanks for your great work, and it was overdue for a long time to give incentive for new developers, and many people, they want to the renovations on their properties, but they were scared their taxes will go up. So I think this new program will encourage them to do more renovations, and because cost of construction is very high over here, and so some kind of tax incentive will encourage them to come to town. So I think it's about time, and I'd like to see this happen very soon. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you. So tonight I know that you're looking for an endorsement of the program that then could be made into bylaws. Mm-hmm. One of the things I just want to say is one of the things I'm very excited about this, not only is it because this is finally that robust development incentive package that I think we've been looking for a long time, but in terms of the impact on housing in the downtown, we know through the planning, through redesign with the 2030 vision, that I think it's somewhere between 500 to 1,000 residents could be fit within the existing footprint of the downtown core, and laser focusing on the redevelopment of downtown to do mixed use of commercial and housing and getting people living in downtown. I think this is going to really spark that curiosity for developers to come and build these types of infrastructure for us. But also that, one of the biggest complaints I've had for the last 6 years from folks that own downtown buildings is this fear of renovating their buildings, and because their assessments are going to go up, which means they're just going to pay more taxes. And having that addressed here, that if you do your renovations and you address, residential or commercial, that you're going to get these breaks, and that your new assessed values are not going to have to be taxable for a certain amount of time. And I think that's exactly what we've needed to do. So because you have a lot of existing building owners that are prepared to make those investments, I think that's just signaling that we're going to be making a quantum leap in how we treat development in this community. I also really like about how the OCP is shaping up around the 3 new zones of the downtown, the midtown, the new downtown, and the Marina District, because it keeps us focused and it keeps us able to cluster new development to certain areas, so that we're not a kilometer wide of commercial, but as we know that we need to keep it more condensed and focus that in the new downtown area. And I think all of these incentives are going to really address this new mentality for Prince Rupert. And I think, I'm hoping that we're going to see new housing development in the downtown on top of our obviously the other existing housing that's going on the outskirts. But I think part of the point is to keep the incentives focused to the downtown, so that you actually spur that investment and you give a certain amount of time for folks to come and do that. So I think that's a brilliant move. And so in terms of the the developer event, I think that's a great idea, is to have folks come and showcase them what we're going to put in front of them and what this town is about, showcase them the vision, show them what's happening with this community and see if we can get that next level growth that I think everyone's been craving for a really long time. So that being said, I think there's a recommendation here from council, and the two recommendations are, one is that council consider the draft development incentives program as presented and endorse it, and that staff develop a plan to host a development event in the fall. So moved by Councillor Cunningham, seconded by Councillor Niche. Is there any further discussion about this work?
Could you just clarify the difference between endorsing something and making it the
Sure.
case?
So what we're doing right now is we're putting the intention out there is that we'd like these development incentives to be actually put into legal bylaws that we at a later time will pass as a council. So this is not set in stone yet. This isn't legal. There's no legal aspect to this other than that we're giving direction to our planner to develop the bylaw so that we can do a final review of those. And my understanding too is that you're hoping to have the OCP completed on these by the end of the year.
That's the goal. It's a statement of intent. It's not a bylaw, but it's a program endorsement which will carry weight for the folks that are looking to invest.
Great. Other final questions? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming forward. And just before we move on, I will just say that I believe on our website, we're trying to host some get-togethers with the community. So folks that want to come speak about the OCP can make appointments, and we're going to have a week-long event where you can come in, and talk to us and make sure that any concerns you have with the OCP, we'd like to meet with you in person on top of the surveys. It's kind of our way of addressing the COVID issue at the moment because we can't have large open houses, but we want to bring as many people as possible. So all that information is on the city website as well as on the survey that was sent to every household in the community. So please make some appointments, and we will meet with you folks, whoever wants to come talk about this, and make sure that everyone's concerns are being addressed in the new plan. Okay, moving on. Next, we have a report from our Chief Financial Officer regarding the 2019 Statement of Financial Information.
Thank you. The BC Financial Information Act requires municipalities to prepare a document called the Statement of Financial Information. This document provides additional information beyond that provided in the annual audited financial statements and typically must be approved by Council before June 30th. This year, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the province extended the deadline to August 31st. Council is asked to approve the 2019 Statement of Financial Information, thereby fulfilling the requirements of the BC Financial Information Act.
Thank you. So the recommendation is that Mayor and Council by resolution approve the 2019 Statement of Financial Information. Moved by Councillor Randhawa, second by Councillor Moreau. Any comments? Councillor Randhawa?
So once we approve this one, this will be available for our community members to look, or just?
Yes, actually, because it's been posted on the website, it's available right now.
Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, next we have an application for development variance permit at 1002 Edward Avenue. The recommendation is that Mayor and Council approve the development variance permit DP 2018 for 1002 Edward Avenue to proceed to final approval. Moved by Councillor Randhawa, seconded by Councillor Adey. Any comments or additional comments from staff? No, nothing from the residents from the area? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Next, we have an application for development variance permits at 1715 Kootenay Avenue. The recommendation is that Mayor and Council approve the development variance permit number DP 2015 for 1715 Kootenay Avenue to proceed to public notification. Moved by Councillor Skelton Morvan, second by Councillor Cunningham. Do we have any presented information that's prepared for this, or?
Nothing that's in addition to the package.
Okay. Any comments from council? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Next, we have an application for development variance permit at 212 9th Avenue East. Recommendation that the Mayor and Council approve the development variance permit number DP 2020 for 212 9th Avenue East to proceed to public notification. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, seconded by Councillor Skelton Morvan. Any comments from staff? Any comments from council? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, we're moving on to the temporary use permit at vacant block 10. We'll have our two councillors who are recusing themselves from the conversation. Okay, before we have a discussion, we need a motion on the floor. So the recommendation is that council declines the temporary use permit application number TUP 2001 for vacant block 10 to proceed to final approval and instruct staff to advise the applicant that a full rezoning application will be required in order to proceed. Moved by Councillor Niche, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. Okay, discussion. Councillor Morrow.
Maybe I'll just say my piece before I and let the people respond, and then I'm going to move a small amendment. And it's too bad Mr. Veldman stepped out because I wanted to agree with something he said right before he left, which was, I don't think this temporary use permit is a binary decision of are you for port development or against, are you for development in the economy generally or against it. There's an incredible amount of nuance and complexity behind this application. And the other thing I would agree with him with is I think everyone at this table agrees that it's in the public interest to enable continued port growth. More land development is more tax revenue, is less taxes per taxpayer. More jobs and income is more local spending, more prosperous businesses. We all know, the net impact of port development is a positive. But I think this application is the perfect example of the tension in us having to balance private interest and public interest. If it's in the public interest to enable continued port growth, it's also in the public interest for us to protect existing neighborhoods from the negative impacts of that industrial development. And it's pretty obvious that this proposal may cause some noise and light and other type of impacts that we've seen in the 100+ submissions that we've got from the neighborhood. But for me, there's the key issues that I'm grappling with, or the key issue, I guess you could say, is I think the process is equally as important as the product. So the process questions that I'm grappling with is first, what is the specific site plan? Is a temporary use permit a more appropriate process than a permanent rezoning? And regardless of if it's temporary or permanent, what are those mitigations that we can put in place or that we should be putting in place? So on the site plan, I went through a number of temporary use permit guides and applications in other communities of similar size to ours. And I also went through a legal opinion from Bill Bullhoser, is that how you say it? Yeah, who's he's known as a specialist in planning law. Basically, almost every single community requires, as part of a temporary use permit, a site plan, which would include things like hours of use, setbacks, dimensions, proposed parking, landscaping, signage, lighting, topography, and even site rehabilitation. The unfortunate thing is our existing temporary use permit guidelines and our development procedure bylaw does not make a site plan a requirement. So obviously the port did not have to submit a site plan as part of this proposal. But I think that we should require a site plan as part of a temporary use permit. And so we're an outlier in BC for not already requiring one. So that's the first procedural issue that I'm grappling with. The second is on the temporary use process, the permit process versus a permanent rezoning, of which staff have obviously recommended to go with the permanent rezoning. And the basic premise of temporary use permit is to allow for flexibility, obviously, for proposals that are exploratory in nature, which I think that this proposal by the port is exploratory. But if it's temporary is unclear, obviously, based on the fact that they have an offer to purchase after 2 years and there's industrial considerations after those 2 years. So the basic criteria that I think we should all be weighing in this application is, first, does the proposal increase demand on municipal services? I think the answer to that is maybe, if an intersection has to be built. Is the temporary use about the same level of intensity of development? as the surrounding area? Or put another way, is it compatible to surrounding uses and design? I think the port's been pretty clear. They think that they can use this space and have buffers and mitigation, and that what they've said is minimal incremental impact on existing residential neighborhoods. But it's pretty obvious that those neighborhoods disagree based on the number of letters and emails I think we've all received. And it's actually incredibly difficult for me to make that assessment without having a site plan attached to the submission. The other criteria I think we need to be weighing is the proposal time limited? And again, that's a little bit unclear because there's not really a rehabilitation plan attached to it, first of all, because we don't require one, but second of all, because there are still industrial considerations after that 2-year period. So I guess the last criteria, and I think a couple of residents mentioned this, is are there reasonable alternatives for the proposed temporary use elsewhere? And again, I think that's a little bit uncertain. There's a viability question. I think Mr. Veldman was quite clear. There's an economic viability question. This property is already developed in terms of rock and fill. But Councillor Cunningham, you brought up the interesting point of if there's potential alternatives in a southward direction. The other point that I thought was interesting in my review of other communities is that almost exclusively, almost all other communities allow for the maximum of 3 years as a temporary permit, whereas Prince Rupert only allows for a 6-month. So again, we're an outlier in this regard. And the other piece as well, our current regulations don't allow temporary use permits in residential areas, or at least they're not explicitly prohibited, but they are not designated for temporary use permits. But strangely, again, most other communities allow temporary use permits in residential areas, but they set conditions on either physical areas or have different regulations in that regard. So for me, that warrants a lot more further discussion from us as a council on where we're thinking of going with temporary use permits more broadly, particularly as we've thought through the Vision 2030 and the planning for major projects, and looking at undeveloped subdivisions, residential subdivisions, for temporary industrial use like camps. So I think our temporary use permit process, our development procedure bylaw, needs modernization. And that's become crystal clear to me, and that's a couple of the suggestions that I would recommend. And then I guess the last piece is this consideration on process of whether temporary use or permanent rezoning is the proper process. And for me, it goes back to what the Local Government Act specifies, and the I guess the mitigations or the ability for the city to negotiate with the proponent on those mitigations is different in those processes. So other communities in temporary use permits also require financial security to hold proponents to account, that they put up money, and if they don't satisfy the rehabilitation plans at the end of that temporary permit, that financial security is kept by the city. We don't have that provision. The other thing is, if a proponent doesn't restore the land to its original condition, the city can actually restore it and bill them for it. So there's a lot of protections that the Local Government Act affords that we don't actually have built into our bylaw. So I'm sorry for that long-winded piece. So what I'm left with then is a number of procedural questions for staff before I can even consider the product. And I think these would all be best directed to the city manager. So my first question is, based on the fact that the port is applying, or their request at least, contradicts our bylaw in regard to asking for temporary use in a residential zone, which is currently not designated, as well as for a 2-year time limit when ours specifies 6 months. Do we have the ability as council to knowingly contradict or override, I guess I should say, our existing zoning and development procedures bylaw if we approved the port's application as they've written it?
The short answer is no. But we would have to make amendments to those bylaws that are applicable so that you could approve a new a temporary use permit in the new context of the new bylaw. I don't think we can just, well, I know we can't just simply waive what we don't like in our bylaw and approve it. We have to make the bylaw amendments. I think that maybe I'd add a little bit of color to this idea of, or the question that may arise, why don't we have temporary use permits in a residential zone? If you look at the map and you look at the 1908 plan, it's pretty clear, which is completely different than most every other community I've worked in, or in British Columbia, to be frank, where the areas are unorganized and have a series of uses which are eclectic. That's the kind way of putting it. In other communities, and there therefore is a need for temporary use permits to facilitate, you know, the things that the community wants to do. If you look at just up at the wall at the 1908 plan, it's pretty clear what's residential, it's pretty clear what's not, it's pretty clear what's commercial, it's pretty clear what's not. There isn't really an appropriate reason for a temporary use permit in the Prince Rupert context with the existing plan. There'd be very unusual circumstances where you might need one, and that's, I think, an applicable piece of what's going on here, where there is actually zoned properly, which is R1. So I think, so we have to amend bylaws, whether they're zoning bylaw amendments, as I've recommended, or other bylaw amendments, including our development process. There is a requirement, if you were to want to approve this, there is a requirement to amend some bylaws. And I hope they would have some philosophy attached to why we're doing this in addition to this issue of temporary. So the contemplation of temporary is obviously not a use which goes on forever or is going on across the street. It's not really temporary use, if in my definition anyway. And all of the reasons you brought up were the reasons why we recommended that we need to go through the full rezoning process, which includes all the information that would be required for us.
Can I ask a follow-up? Is that okay? I appreciate that. I think from a philosophical standpoint, what I'm getting at in some of those desired changes would be greater flexibility, ability to be entrepreneurial. And I think I would speak for council that most of us share that philosophy generally. But I'm wondering then, so if we were to try to engage in updating our development procedure bylaw with that philosophy of trying to allow greater flexibility, I'm thinking specifically requiring a site plan, just basically what I've listed off here that other communities are doing. So site plan, rehabilitation agreement, extending the maximum time frame to 3 years, allowing in residential areas, and then including financial security arrangements. Roughly, how long do you think that would take for us to amend our development procedure bylaw to accomplish all those things?
Sorry, it'd take 6 months, given that we're in the middle of doing an OCP amendment, a development strategy, and a number of other things that are flowing from the 2030 plan. It would take quite a while to actually get to that part of it.
Okay. So this is my really long-winded way of getting to kind of my main point tonight. So the amendment that I want to make is obviously I don't think we want to put up any unnecessary obstacles, but it's obvious based on what the city manager said here tonight that we can't knowingly override our existing zoning and development procedures bylaw. I don't think we want to make the port wait 6 months for us to redo our temporary use permit procedure or those bylaws. But the amendment that I want to make in rejecting the temporary use permit, and staff's recommendation is to advise the applicant that permanent rezoning is more appropriate. I'd like to just add, if it's all right as a friendly amendment, that we also advise them that not only is it a more appropriate process, but it's also a faster process than us updating our development procedure bylaw. Also, I'd like, maybe this shouldn't actually be a friendly amendment. This should probably be a motion. But I think for me to make an informed decision on the actual product, everything I've said is procedural so far. But for me to make an informed decision on the product itself, I feel like I need more information. And what that entails for me is very simply a detailed site plan that other communities require as part of the temporary use permit procedures. So that's effectively the amendment that I'm moving, is that we reject the temporary use permit. We advise the applicant that permanent rezoning is more appropriate and faster for them than us waiting to update the development procedure bylaw, and that we put a condition that we're going to require a site plan on that follow-up application for consideration.
I just want to, for just a process question. I'm not sure if that necessarily needs to be an amendment other than just part of the notes of what we're sending the proponent, because the rezoning process, if that's the way we proceed, does require a site plan, does require information session, does require a public hearing. So I'm wondering if maybe as it stands, the resolution can just be, and then as a part of the notes, we can tell them that, hey, this is actually a faster option, and here's the things that we're looking for. Is that something we can just do? Does that have to be a part of the resolution, or do we need to make that specifically part of the resolution? That's just asking the question.
Yeah, no, I think there are a number of issues. There's also the one of the fish habitat. There are a number of other issues that need to be addressed, which would be required to be addressed under a rezoning.
So I guess what I'm saying is, do we, as a resolution, have a laundry list of things we want to add, or do we just have one resolution where we add those as commentary notes as a note point? That's all I'm wondering, if that would be acceptable to you, rather than as specifically part of the resolution. Because we could be making amendments to add that. We can add this.
I understand what you're getting at. The only reason that I hope I'm not splitting hairs is just I don't think a detailed site plan is a requirement of a rezoning application necessarily, because what we'd be debating is function and not form. Right. But for me, a project with the scope and magnitude of this nature, I mean, I really don't feel I can make an informed decision without that level of information, which is why that's why I thought it would take an additional motion. It's because I'm requesting additional information from the applicant that wouldn't otherwise be required as our existing development procedure bylaw reads.
So my other last process question, because I kind of agree with that, are we able to require a developer to submit a site plan based on our request within the existing zoning bylaws?
Yeah, I mean, we're allowed to ask for whatever inappropriate.
We're allowed to ask for whatever information council deems is appropriate to determine whether or not this is a good application for rezoning or not.
Okay, so can you read out again then what you were, I know these are process, but we want to get this right? So what is the amendment that you'd like to make? And we could do it friendly if the mover and seconder are good with that.
It's effectively to accept staff's recommendation, but to add, not only is the permanent rezoning more appropriate, it's also going to be faster than us redoing our development procedure bylaw, and also the additional condition of a detailed site plan.
Are the mover and seconder okay with those changes to the motion that's on the floor?
I would like to see a remediation plan if there is as Mr. Hansen indicated, a salmon-bearing creek in there. Is there, what are they going to do about that? If they have a remediation plan, if it's definitely a salmon-bearing creek, like it's a permanent site or a site plan is fine, but I would like to have some language in there about the protection of the creek, or, what's going to happen with it.
And this is kind of what I was getting down to, the language around how much do we add to the resolution, other than can we just put our comments in a form of send into a letter to the proponent saying here are some of the things that we're requesting, because I do agree with that as well. But also, rezoning process, I believe, requires those types of considerations to be occurred, because those referrals get sent out to the various ministries anyways, right? So I just don't want to overcomplicate the resolution as where I'm at. However, based on the site plan information, I think that would be appropriate. Would the mover and seconder be okay with that, knowing that a remediation plan would be part of a rezoning anyways?
I'd be happy with that.
Okay, so we'll say that's a friendly amendment then to the resolution, so your additions will be added to the resolution on the floor. Do you have any further comments that you'd like to make?
I think just the one I would make is actually just to what Councillor Cunningham said. So, I mean, the idea of a rehabilitation agreement is tied to temporary use, being on the fact that if the port was not going to purchase the property, they were going to lease it for 2 years, use it as container storage, the rehabilitation agreement, if our development procedure bylaw was like other communities, would require that. But this is what I'm getting at is the substance of the application, I don't think quite fits the temporary use permit process, because there is that option to purchase and there is industrial considerations beyond the 2 years. So what I'm getting at is the rehabilitation agreement, I think, is it does make more sense through the permanent rezoning process to come as a condition there, rather than asking them to return the site to the way that it is now after 2 years, when they have every intention of converting it to a different industrial use after the 2 years, potentially.
So before we move to council questions, because I know there's going to be lots of discussion here, I just want to ask a question related to that. So, even if we did the temporary use, the port was able to do that. I think Mr. Wright asked an interesting question tonight about whether or not the port can go ahead and just purchase this property and do whatever they would like with it and override our zoning authority. Based on what staff understands in terms of the Marine Act, how this all works, is this a possibility that the port could do this anyways, and that this whole exercise could technically be kind of a futile endeavor on our end, or how does that work? Because I know we've had interactions in the past with similar types of things, but thought maybe we would hear some of your thoughts on that.
Certainly there's two views. The port has one view. They made it quite clear that their federal jurisdiction has paramountcy. However, there are a number of court cases that don't find that allow local government's land use authority to take precedent, or at least be in a joint jurisdictional manner moving forward. So I believe the court's out on that one. But that it is a possibility that if they were to purchase the property and make it under their jurisdiction, that they could make the argument that the local government's land use jurisdiction is not applicable. I don't think it's a winnable argument for them, but they have made it to us before, and that really is going to be subject to the ultimate conversation with the courts.
Okay, so we'll move on to council. So I have Councillor Niche, then Councillor Cunningham, then Councillor Scott Morgan. Okay.
Well, I'm going to go back to a decision that was made in this room a few years back with Mackenzie Furniture and making a piece of property in a residential area a warehouse, and I was against that. And the reason why I was against that is because I am a strong believer of protecting neighborhoods. There's a lot of neighborhoods that are impacted by the port already, and that being said, we all expect some impacts for an economy. You can't. We all go to work every day with some sort of level of danger or an impact on somebody, and I appreciate the port and the economy they've created in this town, but on the other hand, when there's an area like this that would drastically impact people, and they don't really have answers as far as what they're going to do, what time they're going to do it, and what their plan is in the future, I have a really hard time, whether it's a temporary permit or at this time, if it was an application for a permanent use. I mean, it'd be like me coming to you and saying, hey, I want to build a house in a neighborhood, but it might have a bar in it, and it could have this in it, and it might have that going on. But I just want to do it part part-time for 2 years, and then when, you know, I might shut the bar down or I might close the hotel, but you might keep the you know, the house there. So, you know, to me, there's just too many unanswered questions as far as, you know, what their future plans are. And I, if something does happen down there, and I'm not opposed to things happening down there, I would like to see a zoning come forward so that a proper plan can be put in place, as what their plan is going to be for that property, what they're going to do with that property, and, you know, what time those hours are going to be, and what, you know, what kind of businesses they're planning on putting on there. And so at this time, I couldn't even entertain a temporary use permit, and would definitely want to see it as a full application with all the proper channels that would go out to fisheries, highways, all those departments, so that we could actually come up with a proper decision based on proper use, based on them giving us a proper plan.
Councillor Cunningham.
Well, I agree, it's way too vague. It's, you know, if and but sort of thing. And I go back to, is it 5 years ago or longer, when we rezoned part of that to residential? And Mr. Veldman said in this room, and said it wasn't a good idea to mix that type of residential bluff over top of BC Ferries with industrial activity going on now, and it might impact the residential area. And here they are 5, 6 years later saying, well, you know, we can do this. It's, you know, we don't have to worry about the impact. We'll mitigate that. You know, we'll have a buffer zone. Well, you know, 5 years ago they were against it, and now they're all for it. It just, and you know, and at the end of the day, I agree with Councillor Moreau that there's just not enough information here, and to me, I can't make a decision on something like this without a lot more information, because the impact on the community is astronomical, and I just don't think we should be making any decision until we know exactly what they plan on doing.
I think a lot of the concrete points that in this process were made, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of missing pieces on the table here where we don't know a lot of those factors. They don't have a detailed plan. There's kind of a maybe here, maybe there. It might be 6 months, might be 2 years. There's having a proper process that collects all of these details and it goes through appropriate channels to make sure that those effects are mitigated and managed, that we cannot make a concrete decision without information being presented to us. And I firmly agree with Councillor Moreau and his very detailed assessment on this decision. And I think that, no, I think we're in the right track, and I'm in favor of that motion.
Okay, well, I'm just going to say that, you know, I think, you know, we need to move away from the narrative that you're either for or against development, because I don't think that's at all what we're talking about here. And, you know, the port's been a great partner for us, a lot of great relationship building we've done over the years here. And, you know, one of our main partners with Redesign Rupert and the Rupert 2030 vision. And, you know, it's been a pleasure actually working with them to develop a concept of what this community is going to look like. And, you know, we've agreed to work more closely together to, you know, balance the economic development and the community needs. In this circumstance, to me, it's more, you know, it's more about this the process here. You know, yeah, it's a 1 month notice on a small radius of notice on actually a larger land use issue around. You know, it's a large piece of property, and ultimately, when you're rezoning a process, that process is designed to allow enough comment and enough information for people to make informed decisions. And generally speaking, we do require and do request detailed information on what a site is going to look like through a rezoning. And I don't think we've ever blanket rezoned a property without understanding what someone wants to do with that property. And I know Mr. Velman tonight said, well, it's a land use thing. It should just be light industrial, and then whatever light industrial applies can happen there. We don't know what that's going to look like yet. But I don't think that's sufficient, unfortunately, in this circumstance with the fact that it's not zoned that right now. And us just, you know, blanketly allowing a temporary use without really knowing, you know, what can happen there, because we're saying, yeah, sure, 2 years, we don't know. I think that's more at question. So I think a rezoning process, and the port can work with the people that own the property and do a purchase upon condition of successful rezoning, so it's no risk on their hands other than the application process. But in this circumstance, I think having an information session with the community and having an ability for community members to make comment to the port directly about it, as Councillor Cunningham was kind of suggesting that, it's not necessarily appropriate for residents to talk to a board of the Port Authority. It's actually more appropriate for them to go to rezone and have information sessions, because there's a 1, 2, 3, 4 readings, and that allows time for process, time for amendments, time for the Ministry of Environment and Highways, because that's the other thing. I don't think we have any word on highways, on the intersection, on traffic, and that's what a rezoning process allows for. So I think our message to the port is we're definitely wanting to work with you guys, but you also have to understand that we're accountable to the residents of this community who we represent, and that neighborhood in a very short force in a very short amount of time has made it very clear to us that they do not want us to proceed with a temporary use, and that they have a lot of questions still. And as Mr. Wright said today, he's not completely closed to examining what exactly it is they want to do with that. But there's no time in this process to allow for that that level of depth. And we've done enough stuff in that area to know that it's a very engaged area, and ultimately there should be a public hearing on that property that allows a proper process and for us to appropriately accommodate all the different viewpoints and weigh the pros and cons of the economics versus the impacts to residents. So in my view, I think it's just more about the process and getting more understanding and getting more information, and just making sure the port realizes is that this is not about not agreeing that there shouldn't be any more laydown spots or anything like that, but at the same time there needs to be the balance between economy and quality of life. And once again, we're coming up against that barrier, and a proper process will allow for a rational, good conversation to occur so that residents can feel comfort that they were appropriately heard. And in this circumstance, what I'm hearing is that this has felt like a very rushed process. They didn't have the information. Some people got mail dropped, information from the port dropped in the mailbox. Some people didn't. Some people were in the radius. Some people weren't. And I've received tons of emails, and I just think we're not going to bring that level of anxiety to the next level as a council, and I'm kind of feeling that's where everyone's leaning here today. So I just think we should form a proper process, and it's up to the port if they decide they want to move that way. But in my current form and the current way this has played out, I think it's appropriate for us not to approve the temporary use permit, and to encourage them to think long term on what they want to do, and put something, put a methodology together on what that site could be, and if that's the way they choose to go about it, apply for a rezoning, and let's get through the proper process, get some information out to residents, and understand what that could look like in the long term. So that's my thoughts. Is there any comments from staff or any other council comments? Yep, absolutely.
I think you just hit on a bigger picture point that I don't think we've said explicitly, but it is worth saying is we have been incredibly fortunate as a community with all of this port-related growth that the majority of it, as Councillor Nish was saying, is actually happening on Ridley Island, and it's happening at the container port, far enough away from town that actually a lot of people don't notice the impacts necessarily. And so this might be one of the very few occasions in which there is this level of tension. So I think that's worth highlighting. We have been incredibly fortunate that, especially and now that it is worth mentioning, as our OCP is being reviewed in tandem with the port's land use plan, I think their focus is to move south. So we are incredibly fortunate. This might be one of the very few examples of this type of tension moving forward. And yeah, I guess the last point is I want to make perfectly clear that this rejection of process rather than product, I think is an example of good faith on our part. And I'm thinking back to the question that Mr. Wright asked, and I hope that this extension of good faith to ask the port to reapply through a proper process is received in kind, and that we don't end up having to have conversations around the intricacies of the Marine Act and local versus federal jurisdiction.
Any other comments?
Well, all I can say is, their idea was to move south, not north. Now all of a sudden they want to move north. And they've got lots of land to develop and partners they can go in partnership with to develop more logistic parks or whatever they want to do. And, even a temporary permit for this area here when they're coming north into residential, just, I don't know, I just think that, I'm not against development or anything, but I think we've got to look at the fact, the impact this will have on the residents of that area and their quality of life. And I think that's sort of, there's alternatives for them. They don't have to have this. There's other places they can put it. And, if it's just ease of decision for them to move it here, I just don't think that's a good enough reason to put it there. I think they should be looking at alternatives south.
Okay, any other comments? Corporate Administrator, may you please read out the resolution as we have it on the floor, just to make sure we're all voting in for the same wording.
Yes. All right. I have moved by Councillor Niche and seconded by Councillor Cunningham. The council declined the temporary use permit application TUP 2001 for vacant block 10 to proceed to final approval and instruct staff to advise the applicant that a full rezoning application would be more appropriate and will be faster than rewriting the existing bylaw.
And for the site plan, right? What was the wording there?
To do with site plan and remediation.
Yeah, just to require a detailed site plan.
Yeah.
So, not that I want to dictate the letter, but just I'll refresh everyone's memory on what was included in other communities was hours of operation, setbacks, dimensions, proposed parking, landscaping, signage, lighting, and topography.
And as we know, the remediation would be through the rezoning anyways, would have to be assessed, so. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure we had all the language we agreed to. Okay. All those in favor? Any opposed? It's unanimous. Okay, we can now bring our councillors back. Okay, next we have another report from our Chief Financial Officer regarding the FCM's Municipal Asset Management Program application.
The city is in the process of developing an asset management program which will form the framework for asset reinvestment and renewal decisions over the long term. Capital grant opportunities are increasingly requiring an identified and implemented asset management strategy on the part of a municipality. To continue to be eligible to apply for capital grants, which will mitigate the cost of infrastructure renewal the city so desperately needs, we must continue developing our asset management program. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities has a grant opportunity which will enable us to reduce the costs associated with the program's development. We are requesting authorization to apply for the grant, which will specifically be used to help us develop a data governance framework and an asset management strategy.
Thank you. So the recommendation is that Mayor and Council direct staff to apply for the Asset Management Strategy Development Grant opportunity available from the FCM, Municipal Asset Management Program, and that the City of Prince Rupert commits to conducting the following activities with grant funds, develop a data governance framework, and develop an asset management strategy. Moved by Councillor Scott Morvan, second by Councillor Cunningham. Discussion? Anything we can do to get extra funds to do this type of work? Absolutely. Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, next. Is this a it just says recommendation, but doesn't say from which department. Oh no, sorry, report from the corporate administrator. My bad, I could see it there. Regarding the COVID-19 reopening policy.
You had me worried there.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the reason for the report tonight is in order to ensure the safety of the staff and the community during a reopening, to mitigate the risks related to the COVID-19 pandemic, departments were requested to provide safety plans for all areas of reopening in accordance with the recommended Provincial Health Authority and WorkSafe BC guidelines. Council is requested to approve by resolution the policies as noted in Appendix A of the report to Council.
Okay, so the recommendation is whereas the COVID-19 pandemic has caused a state of emergency in the province of British Columbia, and the province and provincial health officer have issued a series of orders to attempt to flatten the curve of infections and started permitting a multi-phase approach to reopening. And whereas council has requested staff to develop a phased reopening plan that balances the need to mitigate risks related to the pandemic while recognizing the essential nature of city services and the city's ability to fund any additional mitigation or prevention services and the policies set out in Appendix A, collectively the policies. And whereas council's ability to further respond to the pandemic are negatively impacted by its limited financial and human resources, limited expertise, and council has determined it lacks the capacity for any testing or technical/medical responses to the pandemic beyond the steps contemplated in the policies. And whereas council has carefully considered its resources, limited expertise in further mitigating transmission of the pandemic, public desire for a phased reopening of municipal services, and the ongoing risk of COVID-19 transmission, and determined the report and policies represent an appropriate balance. Now, therefore, council and the city of Prince Rupert hereby approves the reopening policies and directs staff to implement the policies in reopening city services to the public. Moved by Councillor Skelton Mormon, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. Discussion?
Yeah.
Councillor Eddie, then Councillor Skelton Mormon.
I'm a huge fan of the word whereas now. I say it's right up with another word, but I'm not going to use that word right now. Anyway, I have, trust in the on-the-ground expertise of the various departments involved in terms of the details of what they do and how that can be married to the challenges that are presented by COVID-19. The only question I have about it is we do these things based on a sense that it is appropriate at the moment under the current circumstances to reopen. Is there a flexibility built in if things go south a little bit and we find we have to pull back a little more? Is that how would that work in the context of managing the city services?
We're following the lead of WorkSafe BC and the provincial agencies. I think it'd be difficult for us to become offside with those agencies if we were to suggest something. The lawyers have recommended that we enact these resolutions so as to protect ourselves against the liability that we weren't acting in accordance with provincial or federal agencies that are requiring us to do certain things. So in other words, you don't have much in the way of discretion with respect to these things anyway.
But I guess what he's saying too is that if they change things, that
Yeah,
we can
then
then
we'll
change
follow with them.
accordingly.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Morgan and then Councillor Cunningham.
Yeah, I think implementing a phased approach is really important, and that a lot of our staff do take extra care and prevention of transmission and following those guidelines. And that, I think this is really important, and I also agree with the city manager that we follow the lead of the provincial government and the experts on the ground, and if we were ever needing to dial back, and that was at the lead and the helm of the province.
Councillor Cunningham?
Okay, I agree. We've got to do this, but looking at these reports, they're all 1, 2, 3 months old. And the provinces phase different stages now. And are these current, compared to what we've got out there now? I noticed March, May, June, all these reports are back when we were still not even into phase 2. And now we're moving into phase 3. And so is there any updates that can be done to this, or does this cover everything?
Well, I believe phase 3 was done way earlier, right? And these are applied to phase 3, and that is current then, correct?
Yes, these policies are what we've been using to currently open.
Yeah, phase 3 has been open since I believe June. So we're still.
Yeah, they put the
within
plan
that same
together
phase.
ahead of time. Is what it is. Yeah, for each phase
So
has
yes,
different plans.
It is current. Yeah.
That was my question, because it's an ever-changing landscape out there with this right now, and I know these cover the basics, but I was just wondering if they're up to date. But if as long as they're covering the basics and covering our butt, then we're good.
Okay. Other comments? Okay.
We had a motion already.
Yeah. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. And I'm just got a note here that I need to make a quick back step on the F item on the asset management program application, and I guess it's probably just not on my agenda. I just can't see what it says, but I just got a note here that we need to add to that resolution. So maybe you can just mention what we need to add.
It's an 80% grant, so the part of the resolution that was missed is for council to say, and that the city of Prince Rupert commits $12,500 from the city's capital budget toward the cost of the initiative.
Yeah, so that's applying to the asset manager. So should we just make a motion and a second to that? Then we'll just make a motion then for that. So would you like to make that motion, Councillor Cunningham? So moved by Councillor Cunningham, second by Councillor Scott Morgan to add that to the previous resolution. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, motion's carried. Okay, next we're moving on to bylaws. So a report from our corporate administrator, whoever wants to do it, regarding the Woodworth Dam replacement loan authorization bylaw number 3433/2019.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So as the person assigned responsibility under Section 148 of the Community Charter, I certify that the results of the alternative approval process that was conducted to obtain the approval for the electors for the Woodworth Dam Replacement Loan Authorization Bylaw 3433/2019, dated February 24th, 2020, are as follows. With 10,767 estimated eligible electors, no responses in the positive or the negative were received. And as such, we recommend that council give fourth and final reading to the Woodworth Dam Replacement Loan Authorization Bylaw 3433/2019.
Great. So the recommendation that council give fourth and final reading to the Woodworth Dam Replacement Loan Authorization Bylaw number 3433/2019. Moved by Councillor Renhowa, seconded by Councillor Ady. Discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. And next we have Solid Waste Infrastructure Loan Authorization Bylaw number 3454/2020.
Thank you. And again, as the person assigned responsibility under Section 148 of the Community Charter, I certify that the results of the alternative approval process that was conducted to obtain approval of the electors for the Solid Waste Infrastructure Loan Authorization Bylaw 3454/2020, dated February 24, 2020, as follows. With 10,767 estimated eligible electors, there were no responses in the positive or the negative received. And as such, we ask that council give fourth and final reading to the Solid Waste Loan Infrastructure Loan Authorization Bylaw 3454/2020.
Okay, so recommendation that council give fourth and final reading to the Solid Waste Loan Infrastructure Loan Authorization Bylaw 3454/2020. Moved by Councillor Renish, second by Councillor Cunningham. Discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Next, we have a report from our Director of Operations regarding Edward and Albert Avenue Road Closure Bylaw number 3461/2020. Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. The Director of Operations is requesting that Council give first reading and approval for public notification of a road closure bylaw 3461/2020. So on the screen you see here area that we are looking to close the road. It is approximately 0.897 hectares of road. We have a proponent that we are working with to do a housing development in the area. That will become a little bit more public later on. The first part of it is to close the road and subdivide into 3 large parcels, and that's what we're looking to do during this process. To show you what the property looks like right now, it is a completely wooded area, and the development would be on 11th Avenue, sort of in the dip area there. So we're just looking right now to close the road in anticipation of the consolidation of lots for future development.
Right. So just to be absolutely clear, that road closure that we're doing is not actually a road at all.
That is correct.
It's technically designated a road, but it's actually in a forested area, so there's nobody's roads are being closed in the community, technically speaking.
That is correct. It's a road on paper, correct.
Great. So just making sure folks are clear that This isn't actually a road at the moment.
I have one question on that alley that goes behind the 5-6 houses, right, just farther up there.
Yes.
Is that part of the closure?
Can take a look. Oops. Ooh, shoot. Yes, it is part of the road closure.
Because that's an alley that's used by all those people and that. And by cutting it off at the end of the alley, does that affect the project in any way?
It doesn't affect the project that we're looking at this time. What we can do is we can look at amending this road closure bylaw to leave that lane open if possible.
Would that require another, can it make an amendment right now on that? Or do we need to be coming back to council on this? Because I'd like to do this tonight if possible, but,
Well, it would have to come back to council.
okay.
Mr. Mayor, yes.
So another question then I have is that if we do the closure, are they not able to use the alley still?
Well,
Because it accesses their homes there, right?
that is not their primary access. That would be their lane access in behind, which is a secondary access. So if we left it as is, then they could, in theory, later on not have access, depending on how the development was developed in the future. So we could go and amend this to protect that access if that was something that council was looking for.
Councilor Niche?
I think it would be important to maintain that, because I know there is people that actually have, I believe, carports behind there. So I do feel that for the 5 houses or so that are there, it would be nice to at least allow them access to their properties, which, you know, I don't want to get into devaluing of someone's property because we've cut off their access to whether it be a carport or garage or anything. So I would definitely be.
I have a process
supportive.
question here. Can we not just make an amendment and then trust our director of operations to make the changes that, based on our intention that we'd like to keep that access open and then still do the road closure for the rest tonight? I mean, do we have to do that way?
Just like the existing
Because that's
houses.
what I would say as a resolution would be that council give first reading approval for public notification for Edward Avenue and Albert Road closure, bylaw number 3461/2020, with the amendment that the properties that have access, that lane remains unclosed for them. I don't know how you would word that.
Yeah.
But
I would just like to, you know, maybe to add to that is make it that it's access to the existing homes, because there could be, you know, other lots there that are owned by other people that they don't currently use, or is there maybe?
The city of Prince Rupert owns the
okay.
lots that we're consolidating with.
Okay.
just those existing homes.
so-
Yes, correct, yeah.
Yeah, so just those homes that are currently built is where I would
Okay.
support that.
Okay, we can make those adjustments.
And just a quick question, what's the rationale for putting them into 3 lots rather than 1 lot for the whole project?
The contemplated development is not, is only big enough for one of the lots, and there was an option to possibly do 2 other developments on either side in the future. So in this case, we looked at this time to close all of the road and make the property available for future consideration at another time if council wishes to do that later on.
Great. Why don't we get the resolution on the floor then? So the resolution is that council give first reading and approval for public notification for Edward and Albert Avenue road closure bylaw number 3461/2020 with amendment that the existing property's lane remains unclosed.
Sure.
Is that
Yes.
suitable? Okay. I'll move it. Seconded by Councillor Cunningham. Further discussion about it? I guess all I'll say is there will be some curiosity here, but there will be public information about this development and what this is, but we're just getting our ducks in a row for that development to be able to proceed at that public piece, correct?
Correct, yes, yeah. And when we come back the second time, the drawing will be adjusted so that you see the final product.
Great. Any further discussions? good comment. No, that was a good catch, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, any reports from members of council? Councillor Niche.
Well, this is one of the longest meetings we've had in a while. Lots to talk about. It's been a good night. I just wanted to make a comment on the paving that's been going on in town. Unfortunately, weather has not been on their side, but when they have been able to get out there and pave, the company doing the paving, I feel has done a very, very good job of getting the work done and also doing a great job of the quality of the work. So I just wanted to give them kudos for putting forward some good quality work, because everybody appreciates a nice smooth road without dips.
Two things. One, on Councillor Nissa's comment there, I have noticed that some of the areas they've paved, the manholes are a little below the paving. I don't know if there's a way to adjust that after it's paved or not, but it's just something I noticed driving the wife's little car. My truck, I don't notice it. Secondly, a real quick comment. I appreciate, all our work staff, whether they're administration, yard, they're out in the elements or whatever, appreciate everything they do, but I'd like to single out Rosa for going above and beyond. When people hadn't got their packages for the rezoning on Kootenai, she went out after hours and hand delivered it to the people that had requested it and that. And I just think that's, something that should be pointed out.
Well done, Ms. Miller. Other reports, Councillor Ading?
I have a question that's based on a concern that was brought to me regarding the Rushbrook Trail. And I went and actually had a look at both ends of it this morning just to check. The question was around using the trail for bicycles and e-bikes. And the concern that was being expressed was that there are places on that trail where if there are, say, an elderly couple is walking and there's a bike at the same time, there are places on that trail where that can be quite awkward. And I was under the impression that at first the plan was that it was just for pedestrians and pedestrians with their dogs on a leash. I don't know how we're doing with the leash part, but I know it means I can't take my dog down there. But I did look. I went and checked, and there are no signs now relating to bikes. And I'm wondering where the jurisdiction for that is, and what the history of that trail, it's very recent history, is regarding the use of bikes on that trail.
There are signs on the trail, they're just not at the head, end, and either end there is one or two signs. I know for sure one sign, and bikes are not permitted.
Then may I suggest that the best place to stop somebody from riding a bike on the trail is right at the beginning of the trail. Maybe we could promote that idea.
Concept, yes.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but KN Trails maintains the trail, and we lease that out to them. Isn't that how that relationship works? Is that correct? Yeah? So would we be reaching out to them to put this in motion, or is that a city? Yeah, would be us? I'm just trying to get yeah? Okay. Okay, we'll look into that then. Okay. Okay, other reports? Councillor Randauer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, our residents are wondering, our gas price compared to terrace is 12 cents more last couple of months because of freight from too much freight to Prince Rupert, or our taxes are high, that's why prices are high. Can we find out?
We have nothing to do with gas prices, and as you know, the BC government can't even find out why gas prices are. It's one of the biggest issues, I would say, in many developed nations. That seems to be that gas companies can set the prices whatever they believe. So it's that's well outside our jurisdiction. Has nothing to do with the factors of Prince Rupert, and currently the BC government's trying to mandate new laws around gas companies revealing how they set prices.
Yeah,
But we have nothing to do with us, and there's no way to find out.
$10, 12 in terrace and 24
That's just
here.
nothing that we can do about that. Other comments or reports? Okay, great council this meeting. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, seconded by Councillor Skelton Morvan. All those in favor? Means adjourned. Thank you very much.